If you want to support the channel, then please check out my Patreon page to gain access to exclusive videos, take part in Q&As, and watch my retrospectives before they go live on YouTube. Hello everyone, it's Oliver Harper here. For this week's commentary, Mathew Buck is joining me for a discussion on the 1991 box office bomb, Hudson Hawk. How are you doing, Mathew?
I'm doing okay. How are you doing?
I'm well. I'm carrying on as usual, despite the sort of situation we're all in.
Yeah.
But
I've spent the last 24 hours being deeply immersed in Hudson Hawk.
It's going to be a bit of a Bruce Willis binge this month for both of us, because I've got working on Die Hard 2 review, and you just saw his latest role in Cosmic Sin, correct?
Cosmic Shat, more like. Yeah, Bruce Willis's low-budget sci-fi epic with Frank Grillo. Man.
Oh wow.
Makes Hudson Hawk look like Die Hard.
It's one of his doing was it a role for like $1 million a day, isn't it? So
Yeah, it's one of those. We'll get into that.
So folks, if you wish to sync this commentary with your own copy of Hudson Hawk, put the timestamp to 0 and press play now.
The TriStar horse.
So, as we all know, this film was a bit of a bomb on release. I think it did financially okay overseas, but I don't think it was deemed as a profitable movie.
No, it was definitely not.
So it was a bit of the production-wise, it's a bit of a, I suppose, clusterfuck, I suppose. But the film kind of starts out with some sort of coherency. You think, oh, okay, this is kind of making sense. And then very quickly into the film, maybe about 15, 20 minutes, I think it kind of just falls apart.
Yeah, this intro sequence was kind of the filmmaker's attempt at trying to hint at what's to come, because the narrator here is William Conrad, who did the narration for the Rocky and Bullwinkle shorts. Right. So they were kind of tipping their hat slightly early that they were having a bit of a whimsical tone. This is one of those opening sequences where if you were watching a movie as a kid on VHS and your Bruce Willis movie started like this, you think that you got the wrong movie on the tape.
Definitely. I mean, the money's there on screen.
Yes.
It's for obviously very expensive movie at the time, mainly down to the fact that they kept changing things on the day. I think another film around that time which cost a huge amount of money was Terminator 2, but that looks like $1 million. That is like so expensive. But this, I think, visual effects wise, actually quite competent throughout. But there isn't that many moments for them to throw in optical effects and stuff. But it does look like a lavish production that is just becomes this confusing mess.
Yes. I will say, though, that I do find this to be a surprisingly ugly-looking movie, considering the production. I've never seen a home video version of it where it doesn't look kind of grainy and dirty-looking. It looks like everyone was just sweating all over the film because of the production.
I mean, they made a good attempt to sort of try and depict what Leonardo had kind of Da Vinci had kind of come up with as a sort of device to turn sort of, was it iron into gold, isn't it?
Yeah, he makes an alchemy machine. Yeah. This was actually a big custom-built prop made in London by the film's production designer that they had to ship all the way over to Hungary and Budapest, where they filmed a lot of the scenes at the castle, particularly later on in the film. It's kind of interesting hearing about the film's production, partly because I have a copy of Richard E. Grant's book With Nails, his film diaries. And if you're familiar with that book, you'll know that he talks about the production of Hudson Hawk in very exhaustive detail. And I went through it yesterday with a bunch of post-it notes, just making little notes to go through during this commentary. So I have drawn plenty of research for this to tell you all about the ins and outs of Hudson Hawk.
This is one of those films where I think the production itself is more interesting than the actual movie.
Arguably, yes. Although the movie itself is fairly interesting, I would argue.
I would presume that Richard E. Grant has probably been the most vocal about the movie and his hate for it. Obviously, sort of co-stars have been just like baffled by the creative choices behind it. I don't think Bruce has come out and said, he didn't like the movie. I think he's been quite defensive of it.
Yeah, I think there was some jokes in the 90s in interviews where he would, I think according to around the time of 12 Monkeys, he made a joke about how if he had a time machine he would go back before he made this movie, but in more recent years he's definitely been quite defensive of it, especially on the DVD extra features.
I suppose it may be down to how time has progressed and people see the film in a different way, because it does have a cult following. There's quite a few people I know who really enjoy the film because of its quirky nature and its kind of slapstick comedy, and enjoy the fact that it is kind of a mess and can be enjoyed just for that reason, which is wonderful, because we all like kind of clunky movies, ones that bombed or ones that are just like completely the wrong direction, mostly down with sequels always get a bit weird, but in the case of Hudson Hawk, it's just this kind of guilty pleasure. The funny thing is, when it came out, that Mark Kermode had watched it, I think as a preview or maybe an opening night sort of thing with Kim Newman, and the whole cinema was dead silent apart from those two were just laughing their asses off. And Mark Kermode had interviewed Richard E. Grant quite shortly afterwards, I think, on the radio, and he said how much he enjoyed the film, and Richard just said, "You're an idiot," basically.
Yeah, it was a steaming pile of donkey droppings, and you are an idiot.
I mean, Kermode, despite some reviews he's done, I disagree with, but I still love hearing his opinions. And he loves Howard the Duck, which I think is a terrible film.
Story by Bruce Willis and Robert Kraft. The only story credits those two have ever had. I'll get into that in a second. But
it's crazy.
This is definitely one of, I would argue, a trio of movies where all the big action stars at the time, so Willis, Arnold, and Stallone, all had a folly of some kind. Because Stallone, the following year after this, he would do Stop or My Mom Will Shoot. And the following year after that, Arnold would have Last Action Hero, and I would argue that, to a certain extent, Last Action Hero and Hudson Hawk are quite comparable movies, especially in the way that they've developed cult followings to a certain extent. I would stick up for Last Action Hero more than I would for Hudson Hawk.
Definitely.
The reason why I'm doing this commentary was because I did Hudson Hawk as a Bad Movie Beatdown episode way back in the day.
You did, yeah.
And I stand by a lot of what I say in that review, but I wish that I'd done a lot more research into the production itself. So this commentary is sort of setting that right a little bit. Because I feel like I missed a lot of juicy details about how this film went so catastrophically wrong.
Because the marketing for this film was that it was pushed as this action film, but it's a comedy. It's a throwback to kind of the movies of the past and a little bit of, I suppose, Pink Panther.
Yeah. If you watch the original US trailer for it. It literally has Don LaFontaine going, "This summer, Bruce Willis is back in business, and business is booming." Like, very much playing off of the fact that people knew Bruce Willis for Die Hard, and, that was the expectation. And then by the time it reached Europe, they'd tailored the ad campaign a little bit to more reflect what it actually was. Because there's definitely there's a trailer floating around for it. I've seen a lot of VHS tapes. There's a lot more representative of the final product than that trailer was.
Yeah, there's one. I watched an Australian trailer, bizarrely, where it's got Bruce Willis with like this nice torch, and he's kind of showing it, he's kind of moving it around on the screen, and it sort of highlights the logo Hudson Hawk, and it's kind of played down a little bit, I suppose, to be more of a caper, sort of cat burglar sort of style. So it might, that one seems more in line, but there's a lot of scenes in that are missing in the film. But actually the cast were quite surprised, because they thought, especially what was the lady's name? Sandra Bernhard. Yeah, she was surprised that the cost of the film was so expensive, but it was just over 90 minutes long. She thought it's quite a short film. But weirdly for me, I watched this again kind of just recently to refresh my memory. It feels longer than 90 minutes.
Yeah, it does. It does feel longer. It's an exhausting movie. If you're keeping track of the shoot, incidentally, this right here is their first day of filming.
Oh, really? That's
so
crazy.
Yeah, Michael Lehman says that in the commentary track. The scene before where he's going through the prison, ironically, is one of their very last days.
Oh my god!
So you go from Bruce looking tired from 100 days to Bruce fresh-faced on his very first day.
Excited, thinking this film's going to be amazing. You know.
I think one of the things that's so I would argue that Hudson Hawk, while I'm not a fan of the movie, I would recommend people watch it because it is compelling, and there will never be a movie like this again. For better or for worse, they will never allow a movie like Hudson Hawk to ever get made like this again. But
it's crazy, isn't it? How Bruce, after Die Hard, he became this massive superstar. I mean, he was obviously well known for the TV show Moonlighting, but Die Hard gave him such clout, I think, very quickly, and
yes.
And he managed to get what he wanted with this. And Joel Silver, who is, I think the writer of Die Hard 2, Doug Richardson, who did the first script, said, working with Joel Silver is like having a heart attack.
Yeah.
So him letting Bruce do what he wanted was crazy.
Yeah. I think the conception of this movie, as I understand it, so Bruce Willis in the 80s was an aspiring actor, and he worked as a bartender and a musician. He had a couple of early parts. There's a Paul Newman movie called The Verdict, where he's an extra in the jury towards the end of the film. Paul Newman has a big speech and just sat there as Bruce Willis. Tobin Bell from Jigsaw is also there as an extra who doesn't have any lines. Quite a fun
because he had bit parts in it, and things like Miami Vice and Twilight Zone, and I think it's like Blind Date or something like that.
Blind Date was probably his first leading film role. I've seen that movie. It's alright. It's a Blake Edwards film. It's perfectly fine. He accommodates himself relatively well. Oh, Reindeer Goat Cheese Pizza, which links the two Joel Silver productions from 1991 with Bruce Willis, Last Boy Scout. He says that in that as well. Those two movies contributed to the fact that they no longer have a working relationship.
Oh, really? Is that why sort of Joel Silver fell out with Bruce Willis on Last Boy Scout?
Yeah, I think Hudson Hawk was testing the relationship, and then Last Boy Scout destroyed it. From what I understand, The Last Boy Scout, no one liked working on that movie. Everyone hated working on Last Boy Scout. Everyone hated each other on Last Boy Scout.
Well, that Last Boy Scout is kind of famously known for Shane Black's script that was sold for over $1 million, I think. But obviously, Frank Stallone here.
Yeah, Frank Stallone, the little in-joke, directions even your brother can understand.
I think there's a recent documentary on Frank Stallone.
Yeah.
Need to see that.
A lot of the people involved in this movie are Bruce's friends. You'll be completely unsurprised here.
Well, they're called the Mario Brothers. There's references to Nintendo, which his character is unaware of because he's been in prison for so long. And then he's makes a joke about wanting to play Nintendo later on.
Apparently, there was more Nintendo stuff that they cut.
Was this some sort of weird time? Because I know there was a video game of Hudson Hawk by Ocean Software, which was completely one of those Ocean Software sort of grabbing what they thought was going to be a big film, and they could translate into a video game. But obviously, because it's so batshit crazy, how are you supposed to make a video game out of this?
Yeah. As I understand I think the way that the production started. So, I think Kraft and Willis came up with the idea of Hudson Hawk. I think Kraft got it because he was walking around a quite chilly day in New York, and he was getting the winter wind from the Hudson River.
Mm-hmm.
And hawk is a colloquial term in Chicago to describe the bitterly cold winters and winds. So that's where the name comes from. And then him and Willis kind of came up with this character together. Robert Kraft is actually probably more well known as a musician. He actually had an enormous amount of success as well, because he was a producer on The Little Mermaid, and he also did quite a few of the songs on the movie. I think Kraft came up with the little theme that Hudson Hawk has through the movie, the do 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 do. That is Kraft's work right there, as opposed to Kraftwerk, the band. No, that's Robert Kraft's work. That little theme there. So I think he worked on the score along with Michael Kamen.
Yeah, you can kind of sort of tell what's Kamen's and what's Kraft's, I think.
Yeah.
It's because Robert Kraft, is still, prolific. He does a lot of, but I suppose more of a sort of music consultant now. I think. Actually,
yeah,
a lot of
he was really big for a time. I think he was the head honcho at Fox Music for a very long time. So he was a music supervisor for hundreds of films.
Yeah. But it's bizarre, isn't it, really? If you think about it, they've created this character based around this kind of song or, kind of melody. And then Stephen E. D'Souza has kind of basically just got to turn that into a coherent story.
Yeah.
With ideas from Kraft and Willis. And interviews with Stephen, he said the script was very much a straightforward caper, sort of calling back to the sort of the movies of the past. And it was kind of not so, also clearly not as wacky. And I believe that was probably the script many of the actors had signed on for. They probably thought, even Richard E. Grant must have read it and gone, oh, okay, this seems interesting.
Yes, Richard E. Grant actually says that he got sent the script and it read fast and funny.
Yeah. And which is Stephen E. D'Souza's kind of trait, isn't it? He kind of he's good at injecting humour into stuff, and he's often deployed as a script doctor or to sort of come in and rewrite something, which is in the case of the Die Hard films and things like Judge Dredd and so forth. Some to good effect and to lesser so.
I don't think he was the first writer on the project. I believe there was a duo of writers that worked on it first, and the conception kind of changed a bit. Because initially it was, Willis and Kraft kind of saw the character as sort of like a James Bond kind of type, like James Bond before he was a spy or something like that. And what if he was a thief? So the early draft started out a lot straighter, and they could never really find a rhythm with that. And then they started leaning into the comedy side a bit more, which I think is where D'Souza came in, because obviously D'Souza worked on the first two Die Hard movies, so obviously he had a relationship with Willis and Silver. And so he came in and did the draft, and then Michael Lehman came on board. Michael Lehman at that point was best known for the indie hit Heathers. And he and Dan Waters, who wrote that movie, he brought on Waters to essentially amp up the comic aspects of Waters' script, and arguably too far.
Because ultimately what would happen is Bruce would be changing a lot of stuff on the day because he has such creative control over it, even telling the director where to put the camera and stuff. Which is not his job to do.
Yeah, this seems to be a common thing with Richard E. Grant. Richard E. Grant? With Bruce Willis. Sorry, I'm getting distracted because I got my copy of With Nails here. A common thing with Bruce Willis, you read a lot of Bruce Willis's IMDb pages for trivia, and you'll notice a recurring theme of Willis and the director didn't get along. And it's like, no shit. Because every time you keep hearing stories like, Willis will come onto the set and suddenly go, what if we did this? And what if we changed the idea here? And things like that. And you can understand how that happens on something like Hudson Hawk, which is his pet project and is his baby and has all of his friends in it. Like the guards there, for example. The guards in that room are Bruce Willis's makeup artist and the film's publicist, respectively.
That's bonkers, isn't it? I think this is the one scene that sort of gets talked about, I suppose in a positive light. I think the critics, Siskel and Ebert will kind of like, oh, they quite enjoyed this little moment here where it's stealing an item and singing a song at the same time. But I think
that little shot there, just briefly, that little shot there of them picking a lock was cut out of the UK video version because apparently, people can learn lock picking from watching Hudson Hawk. No, they can't.
But you think if you're going to steal an item, I don't think you'd be breaking out into a song to sort of call attention to oneself,
No, it's a very whimsical idea. I think Dan Waters added that idea in his draft. It's definitely a recurring thing through the film. They keep mentioning song titles, and then Hudson will tell you the exact length of the song, which is kind of cute. But I like. Yeah.
It doesn't really kind of make sense because they just sort of break out into song just for kind of no reason. I think tonally, it just feels kind of out of place in the film. I don't know. It just feels kind of awkwardly, kind of like crowbarred in for them to break out into a song.
Well, I think you've hit a nail on the head there, Oliver, into why the film doesn't work. Is that it never settles into any kind of coherent tone because it's changing all the time.
Well, I love Roger Ebert's critique of it, where he said the script was impossible to penetrate. It's like it just baffled him. Also, he made their list of the worst movies of 1991, with number 1 being Highlander 2.
Yes, I mean, I'll say this about Hudson Hawk: it's not Highlander 2.
No, but Highlander 2 has the novelty of having multiple cuts you can punish yourself with.
Yeah.
But with Hudson Hawk, it's only just one. It'd be good to see. Maybe one day they'll probably leak like a work print. It'll be quite cool to see.
Yeah, I mean the thing about this musical sequence is that I think it is definitely the closest the movie gets to working, because it realizes that. So they're singing a Bing Crosby song. And obviously, this is invoking the kind of spirit of the sort of Bob Hope, Bing Crosby movies back in the day, and that's actually a really sharp move, because a lot of the movie is predicated on the sort of chemistry between Bruce Willis and Danny Aiello. Danny Aiello was a friend of Willis back in his bar days as well. He would regularly go to the same sort of bar restaurant that Willis was in.
Oh no.
I believe John Goodman was also good pals with Willis around this time, as I understand it. So yeah, they kind of wrote the role with Danny Aiello in mind. I saw a press junket interview with Aiello, and he said that they sent him a copy of the script as a work in progress, and he wasn't initially interested because Tommy Five Tone gets killed off 25 minutes into the movie. And they're like, no, we're going to keep you around.
I suppose from this point on, like, it's 20 minutes into the movie, they're doing the song, they're doing the heist, right? So, but it all ends in the most bizarre kind of edit.
Yeah. Well, I think even back in the day, the musical number bewildered people. Lehman talks about it quite a lot on his commentary. If you're going to listen to Lehman's commentary, don't expect any juicy gossip details. It seems like he's deliberately evading that. It's a very I think he tries to be as even-handed as possible about the film. He's defensive of it, but also acknowledges that there's stuff about it that doesn't work.
It's where you got some lawyer over his shoulder going, you can't say that.
Yeah. And but yeah, I think the musical number is actually one of the things that works about it, because it has that chemistry between the two leads here. And I would argue that the main reason why Hudson Hawk doesn't work is because for a lot of it, it's not a buddy picture. Like, it starts as a buddy picture, and then Danny Aiello disappears at the second act.
Yeah. That is, yeah. I mean, despite the sort of the kind of the crowbarring of this kind of musical number, it does demonstrate their great chemistry, and it works. And but as you say, it's kind of cut short. But yeah, this bit here was so baffling, because I don't think when I saw your review, Matthew, years ago, I'd not actually seen Hudson Hawk at that time, and when I saw this bit, I was just like shocked at just the kind of that. It doesn't make sense. I suppose it's supposed to be their way of showing a transition. It's kind of wacky transition.
It's astonishing that something like this happened in a big budget movie like this, actually.
You just can't imagine. It's like the people at Sony at TriStar. I think, no, had John Peters taken over TriStar at that point with...
I'm not sure, but
I can't remember.
Yeah.
But even TriStar must have gone, this makes no sense.
Yeah.
Why is this in the edit? It's baffling, absolutely baffling.
Yeah, that transition there, I think that's the moment when I was first watching the movie where I go, oh, that's where this movie starts to go really off the rails.
Yeah,
genuinely a confounding moment. Like, even if you're in the sort of cartoony zone of the movie, I feel like that's a step way too far to have a character fall to their death and then land in the next scene.
That edit is literally the turning point of the film, where it literally just falls on its arse and doesn't know what it's doing, and the direction it just becomes like lost throughout.
And then you're bewildered by that, and then you get this moment where a guy gets his throat slit immediately.
Yeah.
Gruesome R-rated violence. See, the problem with the tone of this movie is all over the place. And I would argue that it's been trying to do several different things, not entirely successfully. And so, on the one hand, it's trying to be this whimsical, almost juvenile comedy with lots of slapstick humour, but then it's also trying to fulfill the expectation of being a Bruce Willis R-rated Die Hard movie, and the two things do not mix.
No, not at all.
Like, they've basically made a kids' movie with swearing. And graphic violence.
Even the film poster doesn't really tell you much about the movie, because at the main, what I remember the poster is just like, it's just Bruce with a hat with the glasses on, and it just says Hudson Hawk. I'm like, what is this? And there was kind of like the picture of him and McDowell kind of on that sort of contraption, that sort of glider thing that Da Vinci created. It kind of looks like some sort of spin-off of Condor Man or something.
Yeah.
Yeah, it doesn't really. It was also another movie, I suppose, a bit like oh god, what's the Peter Weller movie he did? Buckaroo Banzai, right?
Yeah.
A movie that's kind of impossible to market successfully, and I think that was kind of the problem they had, because it's not. I don't think it's the fault of the of Sony or TriStar trying to sell it. I think it's just like they had this kind of movie that didn't really make any sense. And trying to sort of sell a coherent and clear message to the audience, say this is what it is, just became a challenge. I think
it's a movie that's made singularly for Bruce Willis.
yeah. His ego's out of control. It's up to 11.
To give you a sense of what the movie was opening against, it opened on the Memorial Day weekend in May of 1991. And the competition included Backdraft, which was the movie that opened at number 1.
That's a good film. I like that film.
Thelma and Louise also opened opposite this. That opened at number 4. Hudson Hawk opened in 3rd, but that's not really a positive thing, because it was in by far the most number of screens. It was in over 2,000 theatres, and died a horrible, painful death. By the way, I just wanted to shout out the auctioneer here, who was for a long time Fred in Coronation Street, which I found very amusing, seeing him pop up in this. I first saw Hudson Hawk not long before I reviewed it, actually. It was in those days where I was going through Poundland, seeing what they had, and lo and behold, the one copy of Hudson Hawk turned up.
Well, Stevie D'Souza made a great point about the problem with the film in terms of the villains. Now, he says he made a comparison to Disney movies, where Disney films, you have the heroes or the good guys are comedic, they're funny, they're wacky, but the villains are always played straight. They're never played for laughs. They may have some sort of silly sidekick, but in the case of this, Richard E. Grant and Sandra Bernhard are just over the top. They're not. They're just like.
Yes.
They're like it's like they're from Roger Rabbit or something.
Yeah. As soon as they appear on screen, Lehman tries to defend them in the commentary of, well, this is what they were directed to do. It doesn't entirely work. He agrees on that, but he says that is what they do, and they work brave enough to do it. And I think that their performances are an embodiment of the push and pull throughout the entire production. In that, I think there was this sense that they couldn't go too far, and they were wrong. They were really wrong, to be honest.
Well, Sandra, I mean, she's a successful stand-up comedian. But in this film, she is awful. She is probably the worst part of the film for me, I think. She's just not funny. Her voice just like is so grating throughout. And I don't know, it's just it's an odd choice to have her as this kind of villainous. I suppose maybe if she was played more straight, I think she would have got the role down. But I think she's just maybe at this point she doesn't care and just goes over the top with it just to sort of please the director and Willis at the time.
Yeah, Richard E. Grant apparently was initially asked to do this in a Texas accent, which was dropped at the read-through. I think this is so most of the shoot is in a roughly chronological order if you were watching it, but a lot of the interior work was done either in Rome or in Hungary. I think a lot of the so this auction house scene was one of the scenes they shot in Italy. At Cincinita. Sorry, any Italians for you. I know that I have mangled that horribly. So this took about 2 days to film, and apparently the Italian extras, after a certain point, they had to keep telling them to move your fucking asses because they wouldn't. They were getting a bit lackluster about running around in that. I do love the floating arm of the auctioneer as it blows
it's wonderful,
up.
isn't it? There's bizarrely these kind of extreme levels of violence in the movie to sort of, I suppose, to sort of keep it with that sort of the audience who are hungry for more Bruce Willis action, and they come to expect a certain level of violence. And this film has it. I mean, just randomly out of the blue, this is kind of 18, close to 18 rated violence,
And then we get this transition, which is another hilarious transition, where Bruce Willis gets headbutted by the TriStar logo of Pegasus.
Yeah, it's great. I did laugh at that moment.
Their way of sort of implying the sort of chaos that was happening on set, because obviously the studio was getting very worried about the spiraling budget, so I guess that was layman's attempt at a shot. But
well, that transition does work. It kind of makes sense in that way. But
it makes sense, but if your equilibrium's been thrown off by the first edit, that second edit also feels equally jarring, and it kind of hews to another problem in that a lot of the set pieces don't feel actually connected in any real way. It just kind of scatterbrains from scene to scene to scene, and I suppose it could kind of work like that if it kind of built up any kind of consistent energy behind it. Like if you're going to do kind of surrealistic comedy, you need to have that that sort of momentum from the jokes to carry it along. Like, the story doesn't make sense, but the audience is along with it, and the audience is not along with Hudson Hawk for the most part.
No, it does ultimately feel like you're missing footage, you're missing scenes, because it jumps around. In terms of that transition, it kind of it makes sense that he's been knocked out, he's now in an ambulance, but also it doesn't make it clear that why the Mario brothers suddenly there. It's like you've missed them stealing the ambulance and then taking Bruce. That's that's the problem.
Well, it's also the fact that apparently they ran over on their New York shoot, which was Richard E. Grant's first realization that things were probably in trouble, because he was in Italy waiting for them to arrive. And they overran on this. They particularly this chase sequence, which was apparently quite difficult to film because they actually held up the Hudson Bridge for 5 days to film that chase sequence, which made them extremely popular with the people of New York.
Yeah. Also, that scene there when the ambulance explodes. Why does it explode? It explodes from the rear as well.
Everything has this kind of weird, like why are the Mario brothers in the movie? There's too many things in the film. Like they have the prison guard that's blackmailing Willis, and then he's immediately killed off. They introduce the Mario brothers as the set of villains, and then immediately kill them off. Then they kill them off, and then introduce the CIA characters,
who are named after chocolate bars.
Yes.
The best being though is the guy who played Zangief in Street Fighter.
Yes,
with the horrendous mullet he's got.
Yeah, Andrew Baranowski, I think.
That's correct.
Yeah, Butterfinger.
Butterfinger, yeah. He's probably actually the best person in the film, I think, for me.
Yeah. He pops up in another Daniel Waters written script. He was Max Schreck's son in Batman Returns.
That's right.
He's also Leatherface in the Michael Bay prequels as well. He's regularly called upon to be the big tough heavies.
Obviously, James Coburn, turning up shortly. It's interestingly though, near the end of the film, he gets to use his martial arts skills, I suppose, because he was trained by Bruce Lee for a short period of time.
Yeah. This kind of marked a bit of a comeback for Coburn, actually, because he'd been suffering from arthritis quite severely, so he hadn't done a lot of work up for about the 80s, and then in the 90s he kind of managed to control that a bit more, that he was able to work, and they were very happy to get Coburn on board, because they were very much trying to get the spirit of the Flint movies, like In Like Flint and Our Man Flint. Yeah. I don't think they attained that, but that's what they were trying to do.
He pops up in Eraser as well with Arnold Schwarzenegger, so he was kind of
Professor as well,
playing nice sort of supporting roles to sort of, as you do, you get like an established kind of well-seasoned actor, don't you?
Yeah, his name, incidentally, his character name, George Kaplan, reference to North by Northwest. Pretty obvious one, yeah. They were trying to be very hip and cine literate, very much kind of breaking the fourth wall. Again, that comparison to Last Action Hero. But I think that while Last Action Hero genuinely did it in a way that I would argue was a little bit ahead of its time, while also being, to a certain extent, quite self-indulgent, I think this is just sort of self-referential in a bit too much of a smarmy way. Hudson Hawk is best described as being like a Bruce Willis one-liner gaining sentience. And this is the first part of their Italian shoot, and this is a real location. They actually hired out an apartment with a view of the Colosseum, which, as you can imagine, was quite insanely expensive.
I think Richard had sort of commented, or maybe Sandra had, like they were sort of shoved in really crappy hotels.
Yes.
For a period of time.
Richard E. Grant arrived, and his hotel wouldn't let him in. So he had to call up his agent and find another hotel.
That's amazing.
Michael Lehman talks about shooting in Italy, and from what I can gather, he seems to imply that there was a lot of kind of backhand bribery to use the locations.
Doesn't surprise me.
They were being extorted by the Italian crew.
There's quite a few movies like that, US movies, or sort of even like Hong Kong cinema was sort of taking advantage of shooting in Italy and Spain to sort of just to add a little bit of flavour to their productions. Because Jackie Chan was doing that for a couple of films in the 80s, and it was come the 90s. It's sort of seeing the thing to do to sort of shoot outside the USA and shoot in Italy. There is. If you look at Bruce Willis's movies around his time, because I sort of commented earlier about Bruce kind of,
I just want to stop you for a second, because I want to talk about this limo scene, because Richard E. Grant talks about it quite a bit. This was a custom-made limo, so it did a lot of the things that you can see on the screen, and apparently it was intensely hot in Italy, because they were shooting in August, which is what, I think that building there, that used to be Mussolini's... used to belong to Mussolini.
He designed it. Yeah, sort of Brutto Neo sort of architecture.
Yeah, but that limousine was apparently insanely hot and caused quite a lot of trouble for them to do the to film that scene. Especially because they had 8 other crew members stuffed in it as well, trying to capture all the footage. Oh my god,
that's horrible. I mean, obviously this sequence here is just like mind-numbingly awful to one's ears. Her singing "I've Got the Power," sounding completely tone deaf. But as I was saying about Bruce, if the films he was after Die Hard, he had obviously so many offers, and he started doing a bunch of films, and most of them were kind of either poorly received or didn't do well financially. The things that were keeping him going at this point as sort of box office draw was Look Who's Talking and its sequel, and Die Hard 2.
I think
bizarre.
Willis was trying to break out of that mold a little bit. Oh, in like Flint reference again, we got the keypad. They use that sound effect in Austin Powers as well, don't they? As
they do
as the comms device for Austin's car. Bruce Willis is kind of going through a bit of a rough patch. That was definitely cemented by Hudson Hawk. I do think that being fair to Willis, the critics were probably after him, given that he was a big star at the time and the reports of Hudson Hawk. But the end product gave them plenty of ammunition.
Oh God, yeah. I mean, I suppose after Die Hard, the film that really was a big hit for him was Death Becomes Her. Then he had a couple other, obviously Pulp Fiction was a great sort of supporting character role within it. But he did awful films like North. Striking Distance was this kind of failed action movie again. Also with a great score by Brad Fiedel, actually, which hasn't been released.
Before this, Bruce had another really big flop, Bonfire of the Vanities, the Brian De Palma movie.
Well, yes, it was around the same time, wasn't it? And that was apparently
was about 6 months before. Yeah,
that was oddly because in the interview with Stephen D'Souza, he had said that Bruce had got a phone call from Mark. Is it Mark Canton? I think that's correct. From Warner Brothers, I think, saying, "Oh, he tested through the roof, and they're going to put him in the film, give him a lot more scenes in the film." And Joel Silver was like, because this is going to be a problem because his ego is going to get more out of control, But that film, Bonfire of the Vanities, was a mess. It didn't do well.
Well, and that movie also got a big book about its production, The Devil's Candy. I've read extracts of that, and Bruce is not cast in a very favourable light through that book.
Oh dear, God.
Yeah, so he was definitely pulling a lot of diva antics on that movie as well. There's a scene where a character suddenly just collapses and dies, and Bruce was effectively took over that scene, but again because things were getting too hot, he alleges. But another example of Bruce taking away power from the director. While we're on the subject of that, I'm going to read a little extract from Richard E. Grant's book, talking about that first limousine scene where he's talking to him, where Bruce tries to direct once again.
No.
Bruce is demanding I go stark raving mental, despite my reluctant excuse that if I start this wigged out, there'll be nowhere left to go in my subsequent scenes of dementia. You can't be insane enough in this movie, Bruce says. During a break, Michael Lehman, the director, sidles up to the windows and says to ignore this advice and do less. It's like, yep, that kind of embodies the production right there. Apparently, I didn't really notice this, but this is one of those filmmaking things. They mentioned how they kind of gave up after a certain point and just agreed that they would ADR Richard E. Grant's dialogue, and you can see that in the final product. They just cut to exterior shots and just have him loop the dialogue because it was just too hot for them to film the rest of the coverage.
It's interesting that there's always been talks about Bruce's, influence on a movie, telling the director what to do, changing the scripts and so forth. It's always been talked about either through word of mouth or through books and so forth. And I suppose it may be down sort of Kevin Smith being the one to sort of speak vocally to an audience to tell people what it was like to work for Bruce on that film. Was it Cop Out? And do you think people's opinions changed of Bruce from that point on, or do you think people had already kind of made their mind up on him before that? Because I know his attitude now has sort of become, embrace laziness, as it were, and get paid millions to do 3 days of work, whatever. And also Stallone famously lost his temper with him on Expendables 3, which is wonderful sort of comedy value to that.
I think the difference in public perception was definitely noted. But I think privately Willis has always been kind of known as being a problem. If he's on board with you, that's great, and if he's not, he's the worst enemy. You can kind of get that from Richard E. Grant's book, where he's a really charming guy, very gregarious from Richard E. Grant's readings. But I'd imagine he's one of those people that's great to talk to and a pain in the ass to work with. Like, yeah, if you're not on the same page, and I get the impression that Willis has one of two modes. Like, he'll either trust the director, like there are certain directors that he will trust to do the work for him.
I suppose in the case of John McTiernan and like Terry Gilliam or something.
Yeah, like if he respects a director enough, like Terry Gilliam, Rian Johnson, Wes Anderson, he will let them do their thing. And then if he doesn't feel that he respects them enough, he will try and pull rank and try to direct the movie himself, which is an exasperating experience, as Kevin Smith is. Like, Kevin Smith talks about how he was just taking pages out of the scripts and just saying, I'm not filming these because they'll be edited out later. They're chaff. It's like, that's not your call to make, Bruce. You're not the director.
Oh, this bit here, this is the post office, Royal Mail's underground section, and it's done in London, this is.
Yeah, very brief jaunt to London. They did this in a day, apparently.
I suppose they didn't use Aldrich, they used in Superman 4.
They, that last scene... in the Vatican Museum, they actually filmed that twice because they. So as we've alluded to, Andie MacDowell was not the first casting for this role at all. She actually came into the movie about a third of the way through the production because it was originally envisioned to be Isabella Rossellini. And I apparently the movie was going to be before Die Hard 2. And then they had to wait for Bruce to do Die Hard 2 and Bonfire of the Vanities. And by that point, Isabella Rossellini had dropped out. So they replaced her with a Dutch actress called Mariska Detmers.
I've not heard of her. Maybe I've seen her face.
I don't think she did anything big. This is the closest she got to anything big. And then she left the production only a couple of days in because apparently she was having... severe back pains, and they realised that she was not in a healthy enough state to actually do the movie.
Oh, right.
So they realised very early on that they were going to have to replace her, and so I think that at one point fairly early on in the production, still August, they travel out to a Madonna concert in France to try and talk Madonna into taking this role.
Really? Oh, okay, no, Sandra Bernhard was friends with Madonna, so they may have just tried to wrangle it that way, get her friend involved.
Yeah, Richard E. Grant says this in the book. He says that the reason for desperately seeking Madonna was to ask if she would take over. Impossible, as she is mid-tour. Followed by a rundown of all the possible alternatives, beginning with Joanne Whalley-Kilmer and then a ruthless canter through the ladies of the Screen Actors Guild. So eventually they got Andie MacDowell, who just kind of came on and just did the thing.
Yeah. I mean, she's not awful in the movie, but she just kind of... She's I mean, her character, she's like a nun. She's got trying to seduce Willis,
Yeah, she's a double agent nun of some kind.
That bit earlier, when she's in the Vatican bit, and she talks to that sort of statue of Jesus, and it's like glowing, like it's like a phone or something. I thought, what is going on? This is bizarre.
Yeah. That's that scene where she first meets Willis. Well, second encounter with Willis, actually, in the Vatican Museum. They did actually film that scene with Detmers. So that was reshot with Andie MacDowell.
Oh, right.
Yeah, so she did do a very brief amount of filming. And also, apparently, Joel Silver decided that he would hire a priest to bless the set on that day.
Yeah. That's also another thing Joel said. He felt the film should have been more like Wayne's World. Which I don't really kind of see that. Is he referring to Wayne's World as in terms of like the chemistry between Bruce and Danny? I don't know.
Maybe he's referring to the sort of wall breaking aspect of the movie where it's kind of calling attention to itself, and I'm sympathetic to that argument of like maybe it's not one extreme or the other, but I would argue that the fourth wall breaking stuff is perhaps the most obnoxious stuff in the movie and the stuff that really clearly doesn't work.
I think what it needed was a director who kind of we could handle the sort of wackiness and the comedy value stuff, like someone like Jay Roach or something like that, or the guy who I think did things like with Jim Carrey, things like Ace
Tom
Ventura.
Shadyac.
Yeah. So they can kind of get around that sort of that style of comedy and sort of try and make it work. I think Michael Lehman was probably out of his league on this.
Oh yeah, he was way out of his depth. It's the classic case of, here's someone who did an indie production and let's put them on this big budget movie so that we can claim we can have some artistic integrity and give them this big opportunity, but also if they screw up we can very easily take the project away from them.
I suppose it's a bit like the gentleman who did Fantastic Four.
Yeah, Josh Trank. At least he didn't put a Josh Trank on this movie. He didn't tank his career, but yeah, Michael Lehman definitely, I think, was out of his depth here, and definitely did not know how to control a project that was rapidly running away from him.
Yeah.
David Caruso there behind Bruce Willis, doing his weird running gag of just impersonating people.
Yeah, I mean, it does a pretty good job as a statue later on, but it's just odd. It doesn't. It's just another kind of sort of background kind of comedy scene that doesn't really work.
I would argue that the main reason why Hudson Hawk doesn't work is because the jokes in the movie don't actually make sense to anyone.
it's like there's no punchline, to it all.
Like, him being a statue doesn't really have much of a punchline. It's a running gag, but it doesn't have much of an actual payoff to it.
It doesn't, no.
And there's no explanation for why he's doing it, other than it's a funny thing to do in the background. There's a detail that was pointed out in Lehman in the commentary that I'd never noticed before, which is that he has frog and hate tattooed on his fingers, which is meant to be a nod to Robert Mitchum in Night of the Hunter. And frog and hate, that doesn't even make sense. That's not a joke. You can't just have frog tattooed on someone's fingers and go, funny.
No, it doesn't make sense at all. And also, for the audience, I'd just be like, well, what does that mean? Unless you're completely, aware of what they're trying to reference. That's a very kind of niche reference as well.
Yeah.
But I suppose I do like this moment here where he actually tries to steal the book, and there's a quite a little interesting aspect. And it's the only one, I think, the marketing with him kind of swinging on this rope or something like that. I think this is maybe the only time he does it, maybe near the end. But I think it's the only time
he does it near the end as well. Yeah.
I've never seen anyone have spaghetti out of a sort of
have a thermos. Yeah,
a thermos. No.
Little bit of a fun Italian gag there. I mean, that sort of stuff kind of works. There's some stuff that you can squint and you go, it kind of works, but if it was more controlled, if they had a more kind of coherent idea of what they were doing, it would be a lot better. I think some of the stuff doesn't translate very well on screen, and then there's some stuff which the movie looks like it's very hastily edited at points. Looks like they were cutting material out left, right, and centre, which wouldn't surprise me. So sometimes the gags fly by too quick for anyone to actually register that they've happened.
Yes.
And then there's some stuff that they clearly never shot. Going back to David Caruso's character, Kit Kat. So the reason why Kit Kat converses through little cards is that his tongue was cut out so he can't talk.
Oh, right. That doesn't make sense at all. It's never revealed, is it? So.
Yeah, no, they never actually reveal that. They did make a prosthesis for Caruso to wear, but Caruso didn't want to wear it, and so he didn't actually get a very good shot of it, so they couldn't include it. So
what we've got here, we've got a movie that's edited by two gentlemen who specialise in action. Their forte is not comedy.
Yeah.
So that's another issue. I think they should have had an editor to tackle this who had dealt with a lot of comedy, so they can get the pacing right and the timing of the jokes, and that's it falls in line with one person saying, okay, this is going to be an action film, and someone else is saying, oh, it's going to be a comedy film. That's an issue, I think.
This is clearly a movie that doesn't know what it wants to be, and it sabotages the entire production once you don't have a clear conception of what's actually happening. I don't think it helps that everyone is visibly getting more stressed as the movie goes along.
But it could have been a simple premise, And the weird thing is, he comes out of prison after being away for maybe a decade, I don't know, and then he goes straight back into committing crimes. There's no sort of breathing space for him to either try and get a normal life again. He sort of alludes to like, I need to go look through the wanted ads and try and find a normal job. That was the only kind of line they throw in to sort of say, hey, he's trying to, change his career, but he quickly just falls into it again.
It takes a relatively simple idea and overcomplicates it because everyone is clearly throwing all their little bits in there.
And too many villains, I did like this bit here. He jumps off and he lands in the seat.
Yeah.
He coughs out the feathers, which is a gag that's been used so many times, but it works.
They were, as they were filming this, they were becoming increasingly aware of all the sort of rumours back in Hollywood about what was going on, some of which got very carried away. Like, there was a rumour that they'd hired ILM to put back in some of Bruce Willis's hair in an overexposed shot and things like that, which I think is not true.
No.
But speaking of effects work, ILM did work on this movie. Apparently, this is one of the earliest movies to feature digital wire removal.
Oh, really? It must have been for the bit at the end with the little glider thing that Da Vinci designed. Because that's really well. Actually, the opticals on that are really good. They're not.
Yeah, apparently that's one of the earliest examples of digitally scanning something. Lehman claims it might even be the first example of it, where they just digitally scanned it into the computer and erased out
the matte painting on Die Hard 2 at the end. That's digitally composited, so I think that's probably the first ILM did of digital compositing. I think.
It's definitely one of the very earliest examples. I think the effects supervisor on this movie was the guy that created Adobe Photoshop.
Oh God. Yes. Yeah. What was his? It was I believe he wrote Rogue One.
Yeah.
What was his name again? Oh, I've lost it now. Come back. Is it Bruno? John Bruno? Something like that.
Yeah, I think so. Yeah.
Possibly.
Apparently, when Richard E. Grant was invited to work on this movie, his first introduction to the world of... Because Richard E. Grant hadn't really worked on sort of like this big budget movie before, so a lot of it is him being kind of confounded by the state of affairs and how kind of all over the place it was, although I don't think anyone quite anticipated just how all over the place the production of Hudson Hawk would be.
I got the gentleman's name wrong. It's John Knoll. That was it.
Oh, John Knoll. Okay.
That's it. Carry on.
He got invited to the premiere of Die Hard 2 with Sandra Bernhard, and Joel Silver was like, you see this reaction for Die Hard 2? It's going to be even bigger for Hudson Hawk.
Oh God.
Grant talks about Joel Silver quite a bit in the book. Silver, as if you even have a passing interest in Joel Silver, you'll know that he's a very colourful character.
Well, he's like a classic Hollywood producer, isn't he?
Yeah.
Big, loud, and gets what he wants, and makes movies that are big. But does upset a lot of people along the way.
Yeah. Grant definitely talks about him with a certain sense of awe and fear simultaneously.
Yeah.
I think he mentions that part of his inspiration for his characterization what did come from Joel Silver, like that was the attitude he was trying to get to, like calm, and then volcanic eruptions of just massive amounts of swearing. Like he mentions how there was a time where just Silver launches into a volley of F words and just like, why the fuck is it several fucking hours ahead of your ass? Why the answer me, you fuck?
I think he thought there's an interview with Joel Silver. I think as part of either some sort of film school thing in America or the sort of those sort of part of university or whatever. But I think he had fallen out at that point with Stephen E. D'Souza. They hadn't worked together for a long time, but it's sort of there's a lot of directors who Joel Silver sort of aligns himself with and sort of lets the directors do what they want. In the case of the Wachowskis, he's produced quite a few of their films, and Shane Black as well. He's always kind of helped Shane Black along the way. Kiss Kiss Bang Bang, and one of my favourite films they did was what was
The Nice Guys.
The Nice Guys. I mean, I love that movie, and it's such a shame we'll never get a sequel.
Richard E. Grant tells another great story about Joel Silver. How when they were not filming, they went to an ice cream parlor in Italy, and Joel, rather than deciding what ice cream to have, he just said to the guy, "Just order them." And Richard E. Grant just looks in a state of awe as the guy's preparing all these ice cream sundaes in all these different flavour combinations. Which I guess speaks to the excess of the whole thing.
The whole gag, isn't it, really? That is Bruce Willis, or Hudson Hawk. His whole goal is to get a cappuccino.
Yeah.
That is it.
And apparently they were having discussions about whether people actually knew what a cappuccino was at the time, because obviously this is pre-Starbucks.
Yeah. So I suppose the movie's ahead of its time, Matthew, isn't it?
I don't know. It's both simultaneously ahead and very much of its time.
Yeah.
All the commentary on yuppies and sort of the 80s capitalist culture. I do recall some other stories from Richard E. Grant's book. He mentions during the production of this movie that Kevin Reynolds was trying to get him for Robin Hood, Prince of Thieves.
Oh, really?
Yeah, they were trying to get him for the Sheriff of Nottingham. They'd apparently offered it to John Cleese, who turned it down, so they went to Richard E. Grant. I presume this is between the periods when they were offering it to Alan Rickman, who kept turning them down until they told him that he could do whatever he wanted with it. I can't imagine that movie with Richard E. Grant playing the Sheriff of Nottingham.
It would have been, it would have been a different film, I think. I think, Alan Rickman just kind of made that role his own, didn't he? And he just sort of injected his kind of humour that sort of made it. Took you out. Well, it sort of excelled a sort of film that was could have been perceived as quite drab and depressing to be far more entertaining, But there's a bit with Sandra Bernhard. She said, like in an interview, like, cause at the end of the script, their characters were supposed to be either decapitated by a falling Lenin statue, because they wanted to shoot in like Russia, and obviously down to, I think at that point the Eastern Bloc had fallen, so this kind of communism had come to an end. And they sort of shifted things around, and obviously they spent 3 months in Rome and then a month in Budapest to do exteriors, which was supposed to be in Moscow. Then they changed the story, so they ended up doing an Italian castle interiors 2 miles outside of Budapest in a studio, and the Budapest exteriors were never shown.
The exteriors of the castle are in a small village in the north of Italy, but a lot of the interior work in the castle is all done in Hungary. I think, as I understand it, I think a lot of the sort of the final Moscow leg of the shoot, they were meant to film a lot of that in Hungary, and they booked the studio space in advance, and then the script changed, and so they had to find some way of doing all the stuff that they'd booked in Hungary.
Yeah, it's just a completely mismanaged production, which is weirdly surprising, considering that Joel Silver, he's kind of, he made so many films. He'd have, I suppose, a tighter control over things, but maybe down to the fact that Bruce was sort of calling the shots more often and changing things. It sort of delayed things in other areas of the production. It's hard to know. I'd love to. It'd be great if one day there was this kind of making of book on this film. That would be great.
Here is coming up to this scene. This oh wait, no. It's a little bit later, but I think you can tell in this particular scene, this is in the Romanian leg of the.
Yeah, definitely.
Not Romanian, in the Hungarian part of the shoot. You can tell this is late on because everyone looks exhausted, and the humour feels very strained in it. This bit's the most bizarre bit though, because he tries to sort of get away. I'm not sure if he tries to get away, but Bruce just grabs Sandra and just starts dancing, and it's just the most awkward moment in the film where it's just not working. It's like he's kind of ad-libbed. They've just gone, right, action, and he just ad-libs everything. It's odd. You can feel how annoyed everyone is with each other, and it really comes across on screen. You just feel like everyone is at their absolute wit's end. And Richard E. Grant and Sandra Bernhard are being told to do more, do more. Like, no, it's really, really obnoxious. It just feels so terribly strained.
The only funny moment here is when they walk in and Bruce just waves at them. That was the only funny bit in this whole scene.
Yeah. It doesn't help that as they so commonly do with the rest of the movie, they add cartoon sound effects, and Lehman mentions at this point in the commentary how he regrets putting those in there in this scene. Like, yes, that's a big reason why this feels so terrible. It's because you're trying to do that horrible thing of putting cartoon sound effects on comedy that doesn't work.
Yeah.
Which it just compounds how much it doesn't work.
They do love, the filmmakers obviously clearly love that extending blade that the British butler has, because they show it every time just to show you that this kind of cool, neat weapon, how it works.
Apparently that was a bit of a problematic prop, as you can probably
it probably just extends and flies off his arm or something, you know.
You'll notice just how sort of fragmentary and disconnected it all is, because scenes just end with Bruce Willis being knocked out. Like, don't know how to end the scene, Bruce Willis gets knocked out.
Oh yeah.
Like, it keeps happening over and over again. Bruce Willis gets knocked out, and then he's in the next location. Bruce Willis gets knocked out, then he's in the next location. I was watching this with Phalis and Alison Pregler of Movie Nights, because they'd never seen it before, and I was like, you have to see Hudson Hawk. You got to see it at least once. And that became a running gag. Like, oh, Bruce Willis gets knocked out again.
Next summer, Bruce Willis gets knocked out multiple times. Hudson Hawk.
I can tell you about this scene. I think this is the second conference room scene. I think for part of this dialogue, Bruce Willis wasn't actually here for the shoot. He was still in New York for whatever reason, having flown back. And so they did a lot of this talking to his body double, and then they would pick up his coverage later. And you can kind of tell if you look at the editing of the scene, because not a lot of shots of the two of them together, apart from I think the odd pickup later on in this scene. They're clearly talking to a double. Maybe he was in New York filming the music video for this movie, which is on the DVD special edition, and I think some of the Blu-rays as well.
Well, considering that Sony have put out special editions and stuff, they obviously it still kind of makes money for them, like on home video. I'm sure this probably made some money back for the studio on home video, because people that missed it in the cinema were just like, oh, I just caught this new Bruce Willis movie, and were probably shocked by the results. But the fan base is still kind of there for it. Love it or hate it, you know.
It's definitely managed to eventually pick up a profit. Apparently by 1995 it was in the black, and it definitely picked up a lot more money in Europe than it did in America, where I think it only made 17 million or something quite paltry.
I obviously probably down to the fact that, as you mentioned earlier, with the sort of the shift in the marketing, probably did a better job of selling it. And also down to the fact that, you know, the humour may have worked better in international markets, you know, just because of it's so wacky and weird. And when you watch kind of like comedies, you know, French comedies, or even like in Asian comedies, like Hong Kong movies, where the humour just is a bit weird, it's still kind of, to them it's funny, but it doesn't translate as well. I
don't think this was very much the style of American film comedy at the time. It was either, it's not quite Naked Gun, and it's not quite sort of deadpan Bruce Willis. It's neither one extreme or the other.
No.
The scene that's coming up here, Grant talks about it. The bit where Willis and Aiello fight. Mm-hmm. Yeah, welcome back, Danny Aiello. Where have you been for the last half an hour? He mentions how Willis and Aiello burst through and fling themselves over the balcony, land below, live, and roll down the endless steps, still fighting. This is a cartoon. Apparently, this was the closest to a real on-set mishap. Apparently, Willis hit the camera at one point while filming that bit.
Oh, really?
And did actually cut himself on the camera, which they had to cover up. And the guy that he's fighting, the stunt double for Danny Aiello, is Danny Aiello's son.
Really?
Yeah, Danny Aiello's son, Danny Aiello III, you'll spot in the credits, was a very well-known stunt performer and stunt coordinator before he sadly passed away in 2010. But yeah, he was the regular stunt guy for Danny Aiello for quite a few years for obvious reasons, even though apparently Danny Aiello didn't like the fact that he was a stuntman and couldn't take the fact that, he's putting his life on the line.
Yeah, of course. You can tell there, actually, with the shots when they the close-ups, it's it's a different time of day.
Yeah. Oh yeah, apparently there was a big old squabble during this scene when they get to the bottom of the steps. There's meant to be a dialogue scene they never included in the final cut.
I think
a big old argument.
I think one of those bits of dialogue is in the trailer.
Yeah.
It's not shown.
Because I will read out Richard E. Grant's descriptions of the shoot on this day. Endless delays in setting up a long camera track down the steps to cover a page length of dialogue between Bruce and me. The white steps only increase the soaring temperature. What might normally take 3 or 4 hours to complete ends up eating 11. The problem is threefold. Bruce, Joel, and Michael all have differing ideas. As Bruce has conceived this whole story, he reserves the right to rearrange the dialogue, add jokes, watch playback of each take on the TV monitor, suggest different line readings, discuss the art of comedy, all of which takes time. Joel is especially concerned with the technically slow process by which everything is operating, and is clearly ready to slam sticks of dynamite up any arse that seems to be slacking. Translation into Italian and back takes time. The heat is such that if you move at anything like normal speed, you're apt to dehydrate and keel over. So, yeah.
My God.
Imagine that for
whole film.
About 100 days.
God. That is hard. That's a nightmare.
Apparently there's a moment in this scene where Bruce Willis was meant to kiss Andie MacDowell. I only know this because in the ongoing spiral of the film's tabloid notoriety, apparently a paparazzi with an extremely long zoom lens caught Bruce Willis and Andie MacDowell kissing, and sent that to the tabloids, who printed a story that Bruce Willis was having an affair with Andie MacDowell, and the reason that Detmers was fired from the film was that Demi Moore claimed that it's her or me, she has to go, because Bruce was also having an affair with her, which is all complete nonsense.
Oh my God, that's like you go, one image just could spun out some bullshit story.
It's literally just a paparazzi with a big zoom lens that has managed to crop out the entire film crew surrounding filming the scene, taking it completely out of context.
So bad.
But I think it just goes to show how crazy sort of the tabloid hype around Hudson Hawk during its production was, but also
the popularity of Bruce
fame
Willis
and notoriety at the time.
Yeah.
But yeah, very, very weird in hindsight. Lehman still felt guilty about it that he was defending it on the commentary 10 years after the fact. I'm like, I don't think anyone was really worrying about those stories. Those are the kind of things that get lost to time because they're obviously bollocks.
Well, yeah, but I suppose down to him, it probably felt like such a big deal at the time, and he had to sort of try and make sense of it all, and try and make sure that it was all rubbish. I suppose obviously down to the fact that he doesn't he may be thinking that Bruce Willis will listen to this commentary, for that DVD or whatever. So he's got to play it very safe.
Oh yeah, he's being quite charitable on the DVD commentary. He's being very cautious about what he says about Willis.
What I've experienced is, what you will notice when you ever interview someone who's still working and in the industry, they'll be very straight and narrow on things, and once things stop recording, they'll tell you everything, but because it's off camera.
That's definitely the experience of listening to Lehman's commentary, where he tries to be as complimentary as he can about Willis. You can tell by the fact that he doesn't talk about him directly very much, that they obviously had a lot of fallings out. But he says a little phrase along the lines of something like, Willis, it was his baby. He had a lot of ideas and a lot of contributions, or something along those lines. And you go, yep. And he talks about near the end of the commentary, he actually brings up Richard E. Grant's With Nails and says he says a lot of things in that book that I can't say on that commentary. So
he's read the book then. That's interesting.
Yeah, he read the book, which is surprised me actually, because Grant is quite scathing actually at times. I think he talks about it as being directionless bollocks at one point.
Wait, it's
like really scathing stuff.
Like Roger, if anyone listening has listened to read Roger Moore's biography, he's not very kind to Jean-Claude Van Damme. When he was making The Quest, he thought the producer Musha Diamond and Van Damme were just basically idiots.
I would argue that this is the point where the movie starts to completely fall apart.
Oh, this bit here's not funny at all. Where they're trying their best to be funny.
With the karate darts, yeah.
Yeah.
Where they're nodding along like fucking idiots.
Yeah, it's bad.
This is also clearly where you can tell that they rewrote the script. There's a lot of stuff here where they had to sort of work in from the draft where they went to the Kremlin for the finale. So this is one of the big changes here. So the Louvre was an actual set piece in Daniel Waters' script, and they had to cut it because they couldn't afford it. It sounds like even in the best of circumstances, they wouldn't have been able to afford it because it was a really complicated setup where it sort of was based around revolving chambers and things like that, like a really elaborate set that they would have never been able to film. So instead, you get this really underwhelming cop-out where it just happens off screen.
Yes, yeah, and they've got the item because they showed it to Bruce earlier. I think he's like, no, he said, I'm not going to do that. I'm not going to steal it. And obviously, James Coburn has already and his team have already taken it.
Yeah. So why bother having Bruce around if Coburn's crew can just do the thing?
Yeah, exactly. And I suppose Bruce is the only one who can put those bits together. And obviously he does it incorrectly to, triumph, as it were.
But yeah, this is all new third acts that was kind of invented during production when they realised that the Kremlin stuff wasn't going to happen. So the fate of I forget his name. What is that guy's name? Don Harvey is Snickers. Don Harvey, who previously appeared in Die Hard 2 as one of the terrorists.
That's right.
Snickers' fate, where he gets the bomb stuck to his head. That was something that they'd taken out from the Kremlin ending, so that happened to the character in the Kremlin ending, but then they transplanted it here.
And this ends with quite an impressive stunt, an explosion.
Yeah.
When I watched it kind of reminded me of the end of Rush Hour 2. He just goes crazy ass and just jumps out the window. Boom!
It's again another one of those scenes that ends on a really big, spectacular, bizarre note, and then just leaps into the next scene.
I suppose their way of their punchline to a scene is having a weird transition or a somewhat explosive transition to another scene, or just having Hudson Hawk get knocked out. That's that transition.
Can't imagine why this movie feels so disjointed. Yeah, so this stuff with the sticky bombs was always going to be there. Again, another idea that I don't think works.
It's like some prop gun they sort of invented for the film, and they deploy it later on, don't they? To sort of inject the movie with some explosive action.
I suppose this is as good as time as any to talk in detail about the original ending. Because Richard E. Grant talks about it quite a bit. So the schedule is like a veritable hydra. Every time a day is lopped off here or there, two others grow back in its place, and we're now seriously behind. There are rewrites, new pages, new schedules. The script resembles a Crayola colour chart, as every amendment is committed in a different hue. That's fairly common, actually, just doing the rewrite pages in different colours so everyone can keep track of what version everyone's got. It's not unusual, it's just that this film has more than I've ever seen before. My death scene in the original version involved a fight between Bruce and me in the back of the purple limousine, ending in a stand-up fisticuffs through the sunroof. This reveals that the car is hurtling down the interior corridors of the Kremlin before it crashes into a vast statue of Lenin, which topples forward, resulting in the decapitation of Darwin Mayflower by Lenin himself.
That's right, yeah.
The plan was to shoot the last bit of the film for Moscow, in Budapest, which would be cheaper and closer. For a variety of reasons, this has all been kiboshed, and the finale has been rewritten to take place atop the Mayflower Castle in Italy. But the seriously insane news is that we're still scheduled to go to Budapest to shoot Italian interiors inside a Hungarian studio owned by a producer living in Los Angeles. This sounds like the logic of a deranged baboon.
Deranged baboon, that's amazing. It's another weird thing actually with this film. It's like, what was it? Not the Jewel. Romancing the Stone kind of ends with this kind of battle in this kind of castle-like setting. And as a kid, when I must have caught bits of Hudson Hawk when they're in this kind of castle, because it goes to nighttime very quickly. I got confused with the two films. So what's going on? And I think do they knock two guys out here? Or they just they do. Okay, right. Because I thought to myself, in the trailer you see them knock them out, but they it does happen.
It's a little bit brighter in the trailer because they shot a little bit this day for night, I think.
Yeah, they've sort of degraded it differently, haven't they?
Yeah. Richard E. Grant is particularly scathing about Hungary and Budapest. It's characterised in Grant's book as being a place where nothing works. Everything feels dilapidated, everything is smoggy and grey to the point where the cast are coughing up grey matter.
Oh dear, that's not good.
Yeah.
Well, it's funny thing because a lot of they're trying to sort of cut down and save money, and they'd often a lot of producers would shoot in parts of Europe where there wasn't really an infrastructure to do all this sort of stuff.
Oh god, the dolphin stuff.
Well, it's the same with when you and I, Matthew, had discussed Highlander 2, and they went to Argentina where they were going to save loads of money, but there's no infrastructure there. It all been kind of destroyed. The film industry kind of was on its last legs, and have the resources to really cope with a large production. And
it's the same. It's kind of the same thing here, where Hungary had just come out of the Iron Curtain, but of course, it's. Nothing really works because of that. It's all kind of disrupted and broken. I mean, Hungary is still a very common place for a lot of film shoots to do on the cheap, especially if you're Steven Seagal. But
doesn't Paul W.S. Anderson use Hungary? Or is it somewhere else he uses? He does a lot of these kind of like Resident Evil, films and things like that. They do it in Europe to save on money. Yeah. I think Alien vs Predator as well.
Eastern Europe is very much a sort of little mini hub of filmmaking because of how cheap it is there. I gather for Richard E. Grant and Sandra Bernhard especially, it was a quite isolating shoot.
Yeah. Well, they obviously remained good friends, didn't they, after this?
Yeah. Because they'd... I think by the time they were in Budapest, they were about a month behind. Like, the schedule was a month longer than Richard E. Grant was contracted to do initially.
Oh, right.
Yeah, so they were very seriously overrunning on this movie. Like, doing a month of overruns is not cheap. But I think even before that point, they had the actors waiting in Italy for the New York shoot, and then they were kind of like, there's no one here in Italy. It's in the holiday season where most of the people in Rome just sort of leave for their own holidays.
Yeah.
And so it's I think Sandra Bernhard was actually in Rome for at least 3 weeks by the time that Richard E. Grant got there.
Cool.
And she was trying to the dog in this movie caused so many problems. She was trying to build a relationship with the dog Bunny.
Yeah.
And apparently the dog trainer had managed to convince someone that he was an expert dog trainer, even though he was very clearly not.
Because there's odd shots of the dog, where she throws a ball. It's kind of this kind of odd kind of framing of the dog just running away or picking up the ball or whatever, and it's not very. It seems like very kind of poor coverage of it. And obviously, the dog is deployed later on to attack. And it is quite a funny gag where he gets, does he kick it out the window or whatever?
Yeah, it gets blasted out the window with a tennis ball, which is quite funny, and I imagine very cathartic for the filmmakers.
Yeah, I think it probably was.
Here is Richard E. Grant talking about the dog. The dog is supposed to be called Bunny, and Sandra has been bunnying the mutt every training session and flinging balls about for 2 weeks with no discernible results. It now turns out that Bunny is stone deaf. Sandra is halfway between hysteria and throwing in the towel.
Oh, amazing.
Later on, they talk about filming one of the conference scenes where they have to do an insert of the dog, and they were losing time because the dog was literally doing everything but the thing it was asked for. To which Joel Silver eventually admits defeats and goes, "Just let fucking second unit handle it."
Yeah. Oh, the poor guy's in second unit. I do that scene was funny there where Butterfinger just gets shot. He just walks out the room. He just goes, "It's double cross." He just goes, falls on the floor. But this bit, it does has the funniest bit in the film for me is coming up was when Coburn does those spinning kicks and he gets all dizzy. And so he does a flying kick. There's an explosion behind him, and he flies off the building. It's the most bonkers moment in the film. I thought it was glorious.
See, Coburn gets it, and Coburn is playing his role quite straight.
Yes, yes, he does.
It's like this. Like Coburn gets it, and most of the other cast are being told to mug like crazy. Like Bruce Willis. At points, it's like he's jacked up to a car battery.
Yeah, he is.
He's really pulling all the stupid, goofy faces. And as I keep saying, Willis's approach to the project seems to have been there is no top, there is no limit to how high you can go. And the answer is yes, there absolutely is, Bruce, because this is the result. This stuff in the car as well, I think, was originally part of the climax, and then it became a semi-climax, as Richard E. Grant describes it.
Mm. Yeah, because they go off the side of the cliff or whatever, and the car explodes, and apparently Danny survives, which is... I had water sprinklers in the car. Such a load of old bollocks.
Yeah. There's stories about that. So this fight scene apparently took a very long time for obvious reasons. The guy playing the butler character... he apparently came up with some little 10-minute monologue about what sort of look should I do in the rear view mirror as I look past them. Like, you're not even going to see your face anyway. Oh, if you pause right there, another remnant of something that was deleted from the final film. There was a mini subplot about how Hudson Hawk had a pet monkey, really, called Eddie Jr.
What?
Yeah, and Coburn's character was supposedly had killed off Eddie Jr. at some point.
In the film? There was a scene in the film?
Yeah, in the film.
Okay.
So I think, there was some little subplot about that, and you can see the photo kind of stuck to his hat there. So before he flies off, Bruce was meant to pull out that photo of the monkey and stick it to his hat with his his tongue.
Oh my God.
And and I could have told you now, that's a stupid idea that never would have made the final cut.
God, yeah.
It didn't.
They couldn't hide it because that that shot had him with the photo on his hat, so you can't really redo that. There you go. Oh, here we go. Yeah. He's doing his on the
little swing
on the rope. There you
go. Richard E. Grant has a really fun story about Danny Aiello, and that ending, because Danny Aiello's character was meant to die in that in that sequence, as you might be able to tell. So okay, this is a bit of a long extract, but okay. It also means covering the death of the Aiello character as he's trapped in the car, but not before my character taunts him on the car phone for one last demonic cackling arrivederci. However, the prospect of not being around for the happy ending has set Danny a thinking and a scheming, just how his character could possibly survive an exploding limousine plunging over a cliff would defy most logicians. But hey, this is a movie. Anything can happen, and happen it does. Danny has concocted a plot line in which his character is secretly kitted out with a hidden parachute, the idea being that he has said his goodbyes on the phone to me and will fling himself out of the by now airbound vehicle, pull his parachute cord, and land safely below there in the old Tuscan hills. I presume this proposal is a joke, the ramblings of any actor who might have become deranged by the experience of an endless shoot and being far away from home and all, but clearly he's given this suggestion a lot of thought and actually succeeds in getting this suggestion legitimised. Ditto,
God.
a new green page added to the Crayola script. Having escaped the nuked limo inferno, we next see him astride a donkey, joining the hero and heroine for one last cappuccino before the credits roll. My jaw is now well oiled and accustomed to the drop and retrieval motion it now regularly enjoys, like a marionette mouth.
It makes no sense. It makes no sense. The best part of this bit here is when Sandra just gets covered in like melted iron. You know, it's wonderful.
Apparently, this was some of the last stuff that Richard E. Grant and Sandra Bernhard shot, and by this point they were well and truly happy to be rid of this movie. They were counting the days.
Richard's death is like really clunky. It's like it's not done well. He just like falls. He gets his cables or whatever just fall on him. He just falls on the floor, and it seems a bit of a cop out.
Yeah. Sort
of quickly done sort of death where, you know, hers is kind of like painful kind of experience for her, which is just covered in this kind of hot liquid. But yeah, it's
Oh, here we go. Our half day is full of the usual disorganised, directionless bollocks. I am covered in molten gold and kitted out with a milky contact lens. However, the makeup department are threatening a work boycott as they've been working 36 hours non-stop on these effects. Dollars are wheelbarrowed in and like parking meters. Once paid, they are displayed. Feel numbed today. Just numbed. Numb. That this final day has arrived is predictably not the cathartic release and relief you might imagine it to be. Nay, just exhausted, spent, bleached, dull relief that it has come to the end.
God. That is, usually, there's kind of like a celebration, the last day of shooting, everyone claps and, applauds, to sort of say, well done, that's a wrap. And I presume on that day, everyone's just like, get me out of here now, I want to go home.
I think by the time they were shooting the death scene, Bruce wasn't even on the set at this point. Bruce had already flown back home.
Really?
Which might account for why the coverage is so clunky.
Yeah. Oh, nasty. Yeah, she deserved that though. Her character it needed that. It's the most annoying character ever on film, I think.
See, this is kind of like a big Die Hard action movie climax.
It is, yeah.
But it's sort of in a messy, scrappy way of no one knows what the hell is going on.
See, Richard Gans gets electrocuted and he just like passes out. There you go. He's got a milky eye. Yeah. I did laugh though when he's kind of humping the air as the machine started. Yeah. It's so silly.
He's going way over the top. That's another bizarre thing. Like, why is the butler here suddenly got Native American face paint on?
Oh yeah,
like there's no explanation for that whatsoever.
Something's been cut
out. Also, if you listen very closely, because he's been shot in the throat, I think he says he gargles the line he says in the doorway, like "ah" or something like that.
Oh yeah, that's right.
But I feel like that's a detail that most people would have missed because everything's so frantic at this point.
And it has a terrible when he gets defeated. Hudson has the worst punchline about some sort of hat convention.
Hat convention in July.
Oh, it's awful.
It's at least that one is kind of making fun of the Bruce Willis one-liners, and you can kind of see where that's coming from.
But it's,
at least you can.
It's like Last Action Hero has those punchlines and they work.
Yeah. Here it comes.
I'm sure that was probably a little bit more graphic in the original cut.
Yeah.
Oh, you go. It's a dog, but it's a dog now, isn't it? Yeah.
Apparently there were alternates of that line that was sort of they were all sort of ad-libbed by Bruce, and they just kind of picked the best one.
Let's get rid of this deaf dog.
Yeah, let's get rid of this dog that can't do anything, so we've had to replace it with a puppet half the time.
That's great. They should have had the dog explode as well for no reason. That would have been good.
Oh man, I think if you were watching this in the cinema, you'd feel the movie coming apart at the seams.
Oh god, yeah, he's going full on Condor Man now. That's a good miniature there. That's good. See, like, this is like, yeah, it's obviously John Knoll doing his stuff, and yeah, opticals are good. They're not washed out. They're very well put together. But it's it's only like enough. These effects can look pretty polished when there isn't that much to do. They can spend the time on them.
Yeah. And it looks perfectly fine. I mean, they built a working prop as well, and they got some models of it as well. So they got some good coverage. It's just the problem is that it's all this excess in so many different spiraling directions.
Yeah, yeah.
But at least, it's a movie where Bruce Willis actually looks like he's interested in what's going on in it.
Well, yeah. I suppose he's try and keep up the enthusiasm. In his head, it probably thinks, oh, this is going to work. This is going to work. And it's when you do those last minute changes on the day, just being spontaneous and ad-libbing, it's for the most part, it generally doesn't work because. The writer has fine-tuned it for these things to sort of take place. This 3-act structure. This is going to pay off this moment. When you change all that, it sort of has this massive domino effect on everything else.
Yeah, and it's also the problem that the movie is trying to sort of tell a story, and the convolutedness is not meant to be a joke, or at least not as I understand it. Because Lehman talks on the commentary about how he found filming the expository scenes excruciating because they're trying to explain all this stuff and try and ground it in some way. And apparently Annie McDowell had a line that made her burst into tears because it was just something a human wouldn't say. So they had to rework the script. I'm like, that's not really the problem, Lehman. The problem is that you've written an overly complicated plot for a movie that should be simple.
Yeah. That's such nonsense, him surviving. God, it's bollocks.
Oh, apparently when Danny Aiello showed up here, there was another big fight on the set, I think just because everyone was so exhausted. Because Danny Aiello showed up with the sort of burnt makeup, but his hair was perfectly moosed. And Joel Silver just went in a tirade, and Danny Aiello was obviously very sensitive about his hair, so there was a big old argument about it. Just shows the ridiculous collision of egos that gives birth to something like this.
Oh, it ends in a book as well. It's kind of like, I think, wasn't there some, I'm sure there's a saying one time where if you have a film sort of opens with a book, it's going to be somewhat disastrous, once upon a time sort of thing.
Apparently Sandra Bernhard in that final scene in the Gold Room scene, she also had a big old tirade to the point where Bruce Willis had to cuddle her and calm her down.
Oh, God.
Because she was telling everyone what she thought of the way things are going.
I don't think you see her die. You just see her scream, and that was kind of it. The last you saw of her. I suppose it sort of implies that the whole place explodes, that they're both dead.
Yeah.
But hey, Danny survived. Maybe they survived as well. Sort of keep it open for a sequel.
I want to talk about how Richard E. Grant responded to the film. So over about a year later, he gets invited to go see the movie. Does the press for it first, and they're given the pre-ballroom tactic talk. We all had FUN, right? Into the fray. In relays, each actor follows another in 20-minute sessions to encounter assembled journalists who declare their hatred for the film and especially its star. Oh boy. Willis and Silver just go, fuck 'em, whatever. But he finally gets around to seeing the film with Andy McDowell and their agents. And not pleased, to say the least. Empty screening room at Columbia Studios, each with our agents, unable to look at each other or anyone else for that matter in the eye at the end. Shell-shocked into the blazing evening sunshine. Agent Steve says, "You and Sandra were..." "Please, Steve, I beg of you, don't say another word, please." And bow my head towards the car park. Absolutely sure I will never work in this town again. The shame is entirely concentrated in my head, which appears to have heated up rather violently, leaving the rest of me limp and bloodless. Then he had to attend the premiere, and he bumps into Robert Altman and Tim Robbins, who are sat behind him, who are doing research for the player, and they offer him a part in it. And I'd imagine this Richard E. Grant was rather chomping at the bit to send up the Hollywood system, given that he was such a big part of it.
Well, yeah, the player was a well-received movie, so he escaped unscathed by this movie.
Yeah.
Also, on there with the visual effects people, it had Derek Meddings listed as well. So he also did some miniatures. Probably the one time that sort of ILM and Derek Meddings are sort of cross paths, I think, really. But yeah, well, it's an interesting sort of story there, with Richard E. Grant. I mean, it's is it Magic?
And technically, the second time that he and Bruce Willis worked together, because Bruce Willis, of course, has that cameo in the player in the movie within a movie that Richard E. Grant's character makes.
Yeah. Does Richard mention that sort of they're crossing paths?
I'm not sure if he does, but I do. He talks about the premiere for it as well. There is a concerted cheer as the credits roll up front, but already the press and grapevine word has been out for far too long. 100 minutes of you choose for a change. I remember how this cinema erupted at the end of Die Hard 2 and engulfed Bruce, while tonight you could swear some miraculous special effects crew have been in to make 1,000 people disappear. By the time the house lights are up, the stalls are all bare, like that old emperor's balls. Hearse off to the party, quote, held all too appropriately at a club called The Asylum, the cast like inmates. For guests who never arrive.
God. Bruce.
Just absolutely tragic. Well.
Final thoughts on that, really. As I said from the offset, was that it can be enjoyed for all the wrong reasons. I think many people grew up with this movie and kind of cherish its kind of problematic kind of areas. But for me, it's a movie I didn't grow up with, but I was kind of fully aware of its kind of problems and kind of saw it later on, and it is a complete clusterfuck. But it's an interesting window into sort of Bruce's kind of mindset at that time, and him rising to stardom sort of very quickly after Die Hard. And seeing the sort of the choices of movies he made were just like kind of not, obviously him trying to steer away from the action genre, but whatever he did outside of Die Hard was kind of a bit of a disaster. So he kind of always had Die Hard, in his kind of back pocket to sort of return to sort of give him that box office success. But yeah, it's not a good movie. But I'd love to see one day a sort of a sort of documentary kind of detailing its kind of problems, or just having a book to sort of explore its genesis, really.
Yeah, I have a fondness for Hudson Hawk, but that's in spite of itself. But no, there are people that love this movie, and all the power to you. All the power to you. But this movie's a mess. Maybe, but it has its charm. I won't deny. And as I said before, that there won't be another movie like Hudson Hawk.
No.
I mean, I've seen crazy movies, but Hudson Hawk is a very specific kind of bonkers.
It's its own beast altogether, really, isn't it? Well, everyone, that's the end of the commentary. Hope you enjoyed it. I will be back with some more very soon. Take care, everyone, and goodbye.
Ciao.